Welcome to today's podcast episode. This show exists to explore how TTRPGs have an effect on the people who experience them. We believe that TTRPGs are a great way to explore yourselves and understand the world, and therefore we are more than D&D characters. Today we have Jake with us, pronouns he, him, and I'm really excited to share the origin story of how we even got connected in the first place. And oh man, I actually meant to bring up the specific video on my phone because I wanted to read your comment. But no, we met each other through a comment section on a video, the Tomsters. So shout out the Tomsters because I love him. His content is so funny and just witty and yeah, he's a really particular content creator that I enjoy. But on that video, you had commented something about your D&D character, which the video was not about D&D at all. And so I had to reply and I was like, I'm going to message you. So went out on a limb to see if you'd be interested in being on the show. And you were down, and like, I'm so excited because that's such a random way to get connected with someone. But also I've been hoping to interview someone who has left Mormonism and how that's played into their TTRPG experience. So I'm kind of curious, like, what was the deciding factor for you in being willing to come on the show? Because like I said, I really did feel like I was going out on a limb inviting you in the first place.
Yeah. When I first got your message, I was like, there's no way this is real. Like, I had to like check and make sure this is a real thing that's happening because I don't normally get like a lot of engagement. I'm not super vocal and I don't have like this public profile on Instagram. So to get a message on a comment, I was like, oh, and furthermore, like to be invited to do a show, I was like, okay, hold on. We got to make sure this thing is real. But yeah, finding out that this was like an opportunity to kind of share a little bit of my story, a little bit of my experience playing D&D. I was like, oh, this will just be fun. I'm an opportunist, so when it came about, I was like, I gotta do this. This looks awesome.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm glad that I even messaged you on my personal account too. I should have, taken the extra step to message you from the Noct Prone account as well, because I don't even know. I mean, I guess I gave you the title and everything, but I probably did make you dig a little bit to even figure out like who I was and what was going on and everything. So
No,
I'm glad
all
it
good.
seemed
It worked
legitimate
out.
enough. People kind of making connections on the internet is something you should be careful of anyway. So
Yes.
I'm glad that it worked out and that you were also just so willing to share your story too, because I feel like there's plenty of people that I know that have had this experience, but I really genuinely just haven't found someone that has had a story and been like super open to share their story as well. So I'm just super excited for that. So as we always structure these episodes, we'll kind of talk about how you got started with TTRPGs and what that journey's looked like, kind of where your games are at right now. And then we'll dive more into our episode topic. So tell me how you first were introduced to D&D.
Well, I gotta say, pretty common answer to that is like my first real look into D&D was probably Stranger Things, watching Stranger Things and being like, oh, this was a thing that, kids played back in the 80s and 90s. Um, and so that was like my first look into what it looked like. But real life conversation happened when I was just working with a coworker. We worked on a food truck on Saturday mornings, and it was just he and I in the truck. His name is Logan. And Logan told me, he's had been into D&D for a long time, had been watching podcasts and other people play, had never really had an opportunity to play himself, but was like willing to explore. And so I was like, well, if you want to be the DM, like I'd be interested in just playing a character. And so like one random Thursday, I just like go over to his house and he pulls open his big D&D Beyond book and like starts going through the stuff. And like I just kind of created this character, and with his guidance, figured it all out. So literally just he and I doing our thing. I was like a rogue, and I was like stealing random things from people, and I thought that was kind of funny and cool. But then I was like, oh my gosh, my younger brother would totally love something like this. He's very creative and into this fantasy realm. Um, and then later on, like literally a week after that, probably I was talking to one of my best friends, Adam, and Adam's like, yeah, dude, I played in high school. Like I'd be down. I was like, when did you play in high school? You never talked about it. You never said that you were like doing this. Um, so that's kind of what formed our core group. Um, and yeah, it was literally just like talking about it at work. And I was like, this seems interesting. So gave it a try, and here we are, almost 8 years later.
Yeah.
So that's how long
Yeah.
it's been since I've started playing. But yeah.
That's amazing. I love hearing people's origin stories, but I especially love, I feel like, just the aspect of your story where you like found one person who was wanting to play and willing to DM for even just the two of you while you kind of figure things out, and just how people end up building out their parties. Because from what I understand, like that group has been a group that you've then played with for a long time, right?
Yeah, yeah. So my younger brother joined, and then like the week after that, I was like, Adam's got to join. So it was us four. I would say for like the first probably 5 years
Wow.
solid, and it was like every week. And then we've had a couple guest appearances, or like some friends wanted to come check it out, but only for like one session or something. Um, and now for the last, I'd probably say like 8 months or so, my brother-in-law has been a member, or a player in this session that we have. So yeah, we've kind of cycled through some people, but that core four has kind of been together for the longest, and
Mm-hmm.
just rolling with it.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. I love having that core four. And of course it's going to change over time. I mean, like, I feel like the majority of D&D groups kind of evolve and everything. And you got players who come and go, or you can play more or less often, or you start and end campaigns and play characters and all of that. But I mean, overall, that's like pretty crazy consistent since you've started playing.
Yeah, when we tell people, obviously it's like, wow, you play D&D, you're such a nerd, and we're like, yeah, obviously. Um, but then we say like, and we've been going for 8 years straight. They're like, oh, what? Like, that's crazy. How often do you play? We're like, well, we try to get together every week. Doesn't always work out. Sometimes we miss weeks, but like I'm married. We've got another married guy with a kid. We've got two young single guys that are like, doing their life thing. So, um, yeah, it's been crazy that we have been as consistent as we have been for the past 8 years, because that's only added to the amount that we can accomplish in a campaign, right? Or how deep we can go with our characters, because we're like, well, we're not worried about not being able to meet in a whole month. Like, we're going to see each other next week. So it's kind of helped
Yeah.
in that way too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, crazy impressive. So that response that you're getting of like, what? Like 8 years? That's crazy. Is that from D&D people or non-D&D people, or both?
Both actually. Yeah. I mean, from those that don't play D&D, they're just impressed that like it's a regular thing that we do every single week.
Mm-hmm.
And then the D&D people are like, how do you meet so
Yes.
consistently? Like I hear that's like the biggest issue, is that, finding a time for everybody. Um, and like, to speak to that, I think that it's become so important to us. There's Adam, for him, he mentions that it's like an outlet for him, right? He's like, this is not only is it like guys night, got like guy time, but it's just like a place for him to kind of like, okay, shed the work life, shed the at home life. Now I get
Yeah.
to kind of put on this persona and work some things out. So yeah, we've kind of prioritized it. I mean, kudos to my wife and Adam's wife, who like allow us to just walk away from the kids for a couple hours a week, and
Mm-hmm.
be able to escape for a little bit. So it's been awesome.
Yeah, I can totally see how that value grows over time as well, where it's like, no, it's become really important to us. It is your chance to take a break and to be able to. I don't know. It's just interesting to think of the things that you can accomplish from being able to get together with that same group of people so consistently, to do an activity that you love. Like there's some power behind that, but also
Yeah.
kudos to the family members and everyone else that, allows that to happen, right? Because
Yes,
that's
100%.
part of the challenge. That's the reason why I asked you if it was D&D people or non-D&D people that were like so surprised with that, because your explanation was my thought exactly. People who don't know anything about the game are like, what? That's crazy. I can't imagine being that consistent for
Yeah.
anything, and being like that committed to something. But then D&D people are like, how would you do that?
Yeah.
Because so many people want that. That's exactly what they strive for. But to accomplish that is impressive.
Yes, for sure.
Cool. Awesome. I'm curious right now, like, you kind of mentioned who's in the game right now. Are you
Hmm.
playing D&D? Is it a different system? I can't remember. And then like what's your character? I'm just curious like what your more
Oh,
recent D&D adventures have looked like.
so uh, it's a great question because the campaign we're playing is very home brewed. It is D&D. Um, and now the name is escaping me. What did I say? It's something Academy. Spelljammer Academy.
Yes.
But it's
Uh-huh.
like when I mention that to people, they're like, "Oh yeah, so you're doing this?" I'm like, no. It's like a completely different version. Um, and it's evolved to the point where, we're basically exploring the astral plane, and because of that, we're like hopping into like different portals and dimensions. So we started off as this like our character or main character, you could call it. And I think as of last week, we've done like four four other dimensions.
Wow.
So four separate characters, and in those dimensions are like mini campaigns, if you will, kind of one-offs, but they're a totally different RPG game. So one was like the Honey Heist, which was a popular one. Um, One was like a Swedish one, crazy, weird. The Call of Cthulhu, some people might be familiar with
Mm-hmm.
that. So
Mm-hmm.
totally different mechanics, different character sets, rules. Um, so it's been very interesting. Having to play and come up with different characters, and I'm one to like really dive into the character side because I love like coming up with a personality, an accent. It plays into the role playing obviously a little bit better when you're like in character.
Yeah.
So playing like five different characters in a campaign isn't ideal, but it's been fun. It's made things chaotic and interesting, so I'm about it.
Yes, for sure. Well, I love the idea of having all those separate things, but the fact that they're connected, um, to me, I feel like that would give me a sense of like commitment's not the word I'm looking for, but just a core place to kind of center yourself to while also being able to explore like such different things. I don't think I've
Yeah.
ever played a campaign like that before, but I've heard of it a couple of times and I'm like, I'm so into that. I think that sounds so fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been crazy, but very fun.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, so to introduce our theme today, I actually want to hear some of the background of your faith crisis, if that phrase is an accurate way to describe that.
That's I guess the trending term, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned before, I feel like this part of it is like probably if you want to get into all the details would be its own episode on maybe some other platforms. But to give you the breakdown, grew up LDS, grew up Mormon, and was very faithful, very devout. My parents as well. They had seven kids, and we were the kind of shining pillar of like perfect Mormon family growing up, from Gilbert, Arizona. So as you can imagine, lots of other surrounding Mormons to support us. Um, and did all the things. Just uh, like I said, live faithfully, and did all the kind of checked off all the requirements and things that you kind of naturally do in the Mormon Church, and went on my mission. Actually served in Salt Lake City. So shout out to my Salt Lake City peeps. You'd think, wow, a Mormon missionary going to Salt Lake. How does that make any sense? It's where I was called. I was luckily called to speak Spanish.
That's cool.
But had a great experience there. Honestly did. Met a lot of great people. While I was on my mission, my dad, who again, very devout, had started to explore some of the deeper mysteries, as they say, reading things like Hugh Nibley and some of the things that aren't normally talked about in traditional church settings. And he would kind of like mention things to me in my emails and just be like, "Hey, have you ever like thought about this or like look at this scripture? Like, what does this mean?" And it's like, "Oh, Dad, this kind of seems like a little complicated, a little complex. I didn't really understand it at the time." I got home, and his search had continued, his journey had continued, and there was a little bit more of like a challenging tone to some of his ideas. Like, have you ever thought about it this way? For example, in the Word of Wisdom, which is, the health code for the Mormons, um, there's a verse that basically says like all these grains are great for this and that and this and that, and then mild barley is good for the use of man. And he's like, "What do you think mild barley is?" And I was like, I don't really know. And he's like, "Well, traditionally that was known as beer back in the day." And I was like, "Huh." And it was the first time that I'd ever heard that it was a possibility that Joseph Smith could have had maybe a beer, right? Um, and I and I it's such a simple and silly thing to say, like that's what kind of like started to break my shelf was the Word of Wisdom of all things. Um because I had been so like locked into the, no coffee, no tea, no alcohol, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that it was like, oh, wait a sec. Started doing some research, started to, kind of open up my mind to possibilities of like, oh, it does look like the pioneers actually drank coffee and tea while they were like on their trek. It was part of their packing lists, or they wrote about it in their journals. And starting to find out some of that stuff that I had not been told was like, what other things was I not really told? Or even if it's controversial, even if it doesn't quite make sense, like I just didn't know any of this stuff. So then it all kind of like collapses, as they say. The shelf kind of breaks, and the horse binders kind of just like open up, and it's like, whoa, you start to see a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably spent the next 2 years after I'd gotten home from my mission, like really studying this and really getting into the weeds with the doctrine, scripture. And not to get too far into it, but I basically kind of got guided into this other sect, if you will. Some people might know of Denver Snuffer. It
Mm-hmm.
was kind of like this like offshoot of Mormonism that was pretty close to, but they were kind of going back to like traditional Joseph Smith teachings without polygamy. I always clarify, but just more like what Joseph Smith was trying to accomplish. And that's ultimately what got me in trouble with the church, because we started to do these ordinances and things outside of the typical authority of the church. But it was actually kind of cool because like we were doing the sacrament with wine and bread, which was, and like whole loaves of bread, not just like tiny little pieces. So like it was a cool idea to be like, well, if you're going to do the sacrament, you should be able to take as much as you want and do it how Jesus taught us, how he did it. So think, yeah, just more like traditional beliefs, back to the core, back to the original idea of it. Um, and I was there for probably like a year and a half in that group. And for me, a little later on, it kind of just started feeling the same. And I was like, oh, I feel like this kind of like led me down and just to another church, another group, another religious sect. So I decided to just totally step away for a while and be, I guess, agnostic. And so that's where I am right now. I did not get into all the details of my story and how that affected my wife, and we were married in the temple, but that is probably some other layers and details there that don't necessarily pertain, but that was all kind of layered in there as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Man, I mean, between our previous conversation and also like everything that you're talking about, I just feel like so much of that sounds like a wild ride. And I've heard a lot of people's stories on, people leaving their religion. And I feel like there's so many things I feel like that I can catch as stuff that's in common that I see a lot versus things that are more unique. And I think you have a couple of those more unique factors in there that to me just sound like extra challenging. Maybe just because in my mind I have a baseline for the minimum of what you experience when you leave your religion, right? And I just feel like you've got some, like you said, you have layers to that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I find that all really fascinating, and like you said, I'm sure there are so many details there. Yeah, like I can just only imagine. So tell me though, like the timeline, because first of all, The fact that that started on your mission is pretty wild.
Yeah,
Like that's intense. That's an intense time for that, shelf to start to get weighted.
right.
So then tell me the timeline of when you started with the Denver Snuffer and then also when you decided to completely step away, because that timeline, I'm
Yeah.
curious how that lines up with some of your D&D experiences later.
Okay. Sure. Um, so yeah, on my mission, that was 2012 to 2014. Um, and just being in Salt Lake, seeing firsthand some of the things, tithing and what they were spending on, like you mentioned, just starting to weigh down on the shelf. And then came home from my mission 2014, and I would say by that fall was really where I started to dive in deeper, like with my dad. Because I mentioned before, like it was a little bit more challenging, a little bit more questionable. We were getting into some arguments, he and I, theological debates and things like that. So by that fall, I had I would consider, like, definitely, like, I was totally locked into the other side of things. I had been introduced to the Denver Snuffer by that point. I'd also like been dating my now wife for a couple of months then as well, and so that yeah, so she was totally active. I was starting to like question. Um, so let's see, fall, and then that winter. She decides to break up with me because she's like, you're not going to be a part of this church. I'm like, man, I really love this girl. I'd rather kind of, I guess, suffer through some of the things I've learned about the church and just like go back to it,
Mm.
than to be separated from her. So I told her that was my plan. Um, and it seems really silly, and it was totally wrong of me to do. We obviously worked through it, but it was a little bit like, in my mind, I was justifying it like Nephi putting on Laban's disguise. The Holy Ghost in the Book of Mormon uh, tells Nephi to put on this disguise and basically lie about who he is. And I felt like that was like, oh, like if he can do that, I can do that, and it's okay,
Mm.
right? So that was kind of my story. We had I'd stepped away. We get married. We go to the temple. We do the thing. About 3 months after that, this is 2015 now. 3 months after we had gotten married, I was like in a deep dark hole. I was just imposter syndrome. I was like, I know some of these things. I've studied a lot of these things. So um, kind of went back into that group, and it wasn't the best thing for my wife, obviously, who was still practicing and still active. And so we separated. And I kind of like full in fledged, like went with this Denver Snuffer group. My wife and I were separate for a little bit. We kind of worked some things out. Months later, she's like, no matter what, I want to be with you. I'm like, wow, this is incredible to hear. It's amazing. Um, So for that next, I guess you could say probably year and a half, I stuck with the Denver Snuffer group, and it still caused a lot of contention between my wife and I, and I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why I decided to step away too. Um, was I was like so charged with all this resentment and anger about all these things that I didn't know, and so I was like kind of like passing that off to her and being like, "How do you not see this? Like, how can you not understand?" Um, in the midst of all that, I was excommunicated. I guess that's maybe a little detail I could throw in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
not a big deal, but no, I was excommunicated because, outside of the authority of the church, it's a big no-no to do those kinds of things. But my wife stuck through that with me. Like, she was outside of the office that whole
Mm.
time.
Mm.
Um, so just kind of that dedication from her side after all of this stuff had already kind of become loose. Um, so yeah, I mean, the next 2 years were like pretty tough, pretty hard. When I stepped away, I basically, in my mind, decided to like stop talking about anything religious for a while. And then that's when it kind of started to open up a little bit for her, because I wasn't preaching so much. And she like comes home from work, she's like, so I tried some coffee and it was pretty good. And I'm like, oh my
Oh.
gosh, like inside I'm like, I'm like, oh, that's cool, like nice coffee, trying to keep it cool. And yeah, so from there I would say, we both obviously evolved, and that was what, circa 2016, 2017, several years ago. And to the point that we are now, like we have two young kids, we're totally out of the church. She's, very, very happy. She's exploring and finding out more. I've gone to therapy. We've done all this work together. So we're in a really, really awesome place. And yeah.
Okay. That's I mean, that does add a couple of those layers, even just
Yeah.
in summary, for what that looked like and everything. And there are some huge moments there. And overall, it doesn't sound like it was over a huge amount of time that all of that happened, right?
Yeah. Relatively. Yeah. Just kind of like close together for sure.
Yeah. I mean, at least compared to, in my mind, I'm thinking of your life in the past 8 years or a decade, kind of a thing. I mean, like
Yeah.
that was all kind of
And
in the first few years of that, right?
yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay. So now, keeping that timeline in mind, I want to know the first character you played. And at that point, was it influenced by your faith journey at that time?
So yeah, I think I kind of mentioned to you that I didn't really see it as I guess I didn't really see the full potential of kind of building out this character, my first character. Because I was looking at it as like, oh, this is like a video game that I can just kind of play and control and do whatever I want. It's like at the very base, that's what I was looking at D&D as. Um, so my first character didn't necessarily have like this tie-in to my faith crisis. Um, and for reference, I think where are we at? We're probably like 2016. So I just kind of started stepping away from Denver Snuffer stuff, or if anything, I was like slightly involved. My wife and I were still very much like rebuilding, and she's still kind of active, still like playing her part in the church. Um, so if anything, it was just like like an escape for me to kind of like get away from all of that and just be like, hey, I'm just going to go into this world where I can do whatever I want. I can believe whatever I want, and um, control my character that way. Um, so not necessarily like any tying directly to the church and faith crisis, but that did definitely come like later as the character developed, and we wrote this kind of story after this campaign that we had played. So for sure, like it evolved into that, but that first initial build out wasn't necessarily like tied in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to think about how there could have been some just underlying influences there, but that it wasn't something you were like overtly doing at that time.
Yeah.
Which is of course like totally fine. And it's just I really enjoy thinking about people's first characters because like you said, it's that first time that like it can just kind of be anything.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's not an element of, oh, I want to try something new, or like I've learned this about my D&D experience, so I want to do this instead. It's just that really, really fresh idea. But I still think it's interesting that timeline wise, it still is in the midst of when you were kind of in the thick of it, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned to me that D&D gives you a space to embody kind of vulnerabilities and highlight certain parts of your like life experience. Do you have any specific examples of that anytime throughout the last 8 years of
Yeah.
your D&D experience?
Yeah. Like there's these things that get brought to the table that I process a lot through like being funny, throwing out jokes, um, or saying some of these vulnerabilities about myself, these weaknesses that I have. and I throw them out as like jokes, or even as kind of like character flaws in my character, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, I'm really tall. I'm 6'5", and people are always commenting on my height. You know, they're always super tall. Oh, wow, like so tall, like can whatever. And not that it's a bad thing. I love being tall, but um, I sometimes wonder like what it would be like if I wasn't tall. It
Mm-hmm.
sounds so silly, right? But my first character was a halfling rogue. And so like purposely like being the shortest, smallest version that I possibly can was just one of the ways that I was like, I want to experience something that I've never really experienced and dive into this character that's like purposely so small, right? Like very short. Um, so that's a small example. Another kind of like deeper example would be, I guess, playing on what I perceive to be is like a lack of intelligence, right? I didn't go to college, kind of dropped out. I have friends that have degrees in mechanical engineering. Adam is one of those. He's part of our group. So he being there at the table and me being on the other side of like, some of these discussions and just seeing his life, I'm like, I look at myself, I'm like, man, I don't feel that smart, right? I don't feel as intelligent. Didn't get a degree, so I had this character. His name was Core, um, and he was like purposely unintelligent, like
Mm-hmm.
doesn't
Mm-hmm.
know anything at all, and so that really played into a lot of like funny things in the campaign, obviously. But for me, I was like, this is actually a strength, right? It kind of like highlighted that just because you don't seem to be as intelligent, like there's obviously like other strengths that you can have. Um, and the build out of D&D is so unique too, right? You have like your strength level and you have your intelligence level and wisdom level. And to be able to play different characters and kind of like uh really get into that character of like not being intelligent or being super strong or whatever, like you do get to kind of experience things that you're, wow, like I am super strong. You kind of like play this trick in your
Yeah.
mind that like I'm playing this character that's like super strong, so like I could also be super strong. Um and so playing these things with like the intentional lack of, um for me at least, when I was building out these characters, was intentional. I wanted to like really dive into like that piece of me. So yeah, in those two instances, and there's been more. I mean, we've been several characters since then, but I always try to, bring in something about my perceived weaknesses into my character to be like, hey, I want to like highlight this and like maybe even process it a little bit through this campaign and see how that ends up. So
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I feel like the majority of our audience, our podcast listeners know this at this point, but I'm a huge fan of putting aspects of yourself into your character, and exactly what you're saying as well. Putting those perceived weaknesses and strengths into parts of your character, being able to reframe them as something positive or even just something to accept or something to overcome, right? Like you get to pick and choose what parts you're going to put in and then what you're going to do with those in a character. And typically, like with a character, you're going to choose like very specific things, like these aspects of me and then these aspects of me. And that's part of what makes D&D so replayable and fun.
mm,
Um, and so I do love that. And I like that that's, you've been able to gain something from those characters by being able to do
yeah,
that. I think it's really cool. Um, I also think that there's a aspect of those things that can be really stressful at first, either at the beginning of your character, like at first when you're playing them, or there's just waves of where that might feel harder or not. I mean, you kind of talked about like being at that table and comparing yourself specifically to people you're playing with at that table. And that sometimes that might kind of be a part of like a lower self-esteem kind of a thing, right? And I don't know, there
mm,
just might be times where that's more or less difficult, but the hope is that you come out at the end feeling a little bit better about that. Like it's
yeah,
just such a cool way to play the game.
yeah, 100%.
Cool. Awesome. So my next question is, I'm wondering if you've had a moment during a game that's really resonated deeply with you or helped you process real life emotions. Kind of similar to my last question, but I don't know. I'm hoping that that kind of touches on something
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. There was obviously there's a long history behind this character. My first character, his name was Azar, and he's the character that we played like probably the most time with, and he had fallen in love with this character Halia, and it was kind of like a forbidden love kind of situation. She was part of a rival gang that wasn't doing all the best things that Azar would have thought was good, but they end up falling in love. And throughout his adventures, they're separated, they're together, they're separated, they're together. But in the end, um, they at a certain point towards the end of the campaign, they're reunited after a long adventure or whatever, and Azar comes to find out that Halia was pregnant, and had basically done this deal with Asmodeus to sell the soul of this unborn child for something for her gain, to protect her. I don't remember the details of that, but um, that was that was not my writing. That was the dungeon master Logan at the
Mm-hmm.
time. What he did, um, but that was like a real emotion I was feeling, because for me that was the representation of like my wife's and like our relationship, and what could have happened or what did happen, like with the potential of like having kids, right? I always knew that I wanted to have children. I always knew I was going to be a dad, and wanted to be that. And so to have that happen to my character, I was like, that was probably like one of the first times where it got really deep and emotional that I can remember in our campaign setting, where it was like,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, that's like real, dude. Like, maybe a little too close to home,
Yeah.
um, without even realizing. And you know, it. I think it helped me just kind of like, yeah, I don't know, just having that emotion be presented to me in that way. It was definitely a lot easier to like handle, but it was still very deep, if that makes sense. Like it was, um, we're like playing this game, but like I feel this like real life emotion, and it's like, whoa, I had to like pause for a second because I was like, should I cry right now? Like, is it appropriate? Because like I don't want like these guys to like feel like this is real for me or anything,
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, playing through that, and what Azar did later was like an intense representation of how I would have felt if like that was actually me. I won't get into that because it's very violent and very gruesome, but you can imagine, maybe some of the feelings that Azar would be feeling was my representation, what was going on in my heart and my mind at the time. So yeah, very, very real feelings come out because, like we mentioned before, there are like little aspects of us in these characters, and so
Yeah.
like when something happens to those characters, it's kind of like it's happening to us, and how we deal with that is very much like how we would deal with it in real life, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, to think of that character experience and how that's what could have been in your real life, as opposed to something that you relate to a direct experience with. I think those moments I hear about maybe a lot more often, where it's like, oh man, this happened. And, that's, I relate that to part of my real life. But to have something that it hits so close to home without being something that you actually ended up experiencing. I mean, in a way, right?
Yeah,
But ultimately, that's not how your story ended. Yeah, but wow, how hard hitting to think of sort of that alternate universe where things kind of went more that direction. Like that would hit really hard. That sounds
yeah,
really intense to me, and I'm glad you were on the
yes,
good side of those possibilities. you know, uh, I'd
yes,
much rather you play that out in your D&D campaign than the other way around. So
right, yes, 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 right,
yes, for sure. But man, I can only imagine just like how intense that could have been in that moment.
absolutely.
Um, so again, I feel like I'm going down this path, but these questions I feel like are all bleeding into each other. They seem really similar, but I'm also curious if you've ever had a experience in game that was just really emotionally challenging to experience, which I think you described that a little bit. But do you have other examples of things that, yeah, were just really hit on those emotions, kind of like that situation?
Um, like I think it wasn't necessarily like emotional as it was. I guess it's kind of emotional. One of my characters who's referenced in the Instagram comment that you found me on is was
Yeah.
Japheth.
Yes. Yes. Actually, and I should have explained this at the beginning. Like I mentioned the comment and didn't give any
Yeah,
context to the actual comment. So
sure.
if you're going to share
Yeah,
about that character, let's actually let's revisit that for a second.
sure.
So, like I said, I wish I would have brought up the whole video. I literally can't even remember what Tommy's video
Yeah.
was. Do you remember? Like, give us all the
Yeah, I do.
context.
Yeah. Sure. So, the Tomsters, he's super great at this kind of satirical there's just he does things in such a way that are like it's obvious, it's funny, it's great. This video was about the temple names. So when you go through the temple, you're given this new name, and there's this kind of like misunderstanding, I guess, this false conception that like we all have our own unique names, but we actually just there's just like a role for the day. Like Wednesday is Japheth, for example, and then Thursday is Sally, and so on and so forth. But he had this video, and it's talking about the new name and some of the questions that you might be answering in the temple and things like that. So it was very funny. So I was like, well, I just want to throw my experience out there for my new name. Like the way that I kind of processed this whole experience was I played this character Japheth, and I described who my D&D character was on a comment, and a ton of people like liked it or commented on it and was like, oh my gosh, like that's awesome. One guy was even like, hey Japheth, like I'm Japheth, like we were all like sharing names with each other. It's kind of funny. And then yeah, you commented there and was just like, hey, like I left you a message, and that's kind of where you found me. But definitely not related to D&D at all, but the fact that I had this my new name specifically tied to my D&D character, I was like, I thought I'll just like throw it out there, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so sorry. Thank you for the backstory on that. So
Yes.
back to the question of just like emotionally relevant D&D experiences with this particular character.
Yeah. So this character, and I don't know if you'll ask me about it later, but this character definitely like ties directly into my experience with Mormonism in the church. So much so that it's like so obviously zoomed in on the issues, the problems, the inconsistencies. I mean, Japheth was a character who was a paladin, okay, uh, and was part of the Church of Lathander, which is commonly known as like the biggest, big, sunshine and brightness and all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, well, we were playing this campaign, the Candlelight Mysteries, and so the beginning of this campaign setting is that we're all um, meeting at the Candlekeep Library, I think it was, and this is a place where you go to like really figure out knowledge and figure out the answers to your questions. Well, Japheth was really struggling even at the very beginning of this campaign because he had started to see some corruption happening at the local levels of the Church of Lathander. Certain tithing was being withheld from the homeless and things like that. So he started to see some of those inconsistencies there. Well, that's some background for Japheth. One of the things, and we call him Jay just for short, but so Jay kind of grows into this character that's like figuring out more and more that like the Church of Lathander really isn't like his home. Even though he was a paladin, he's like this, super strict, like I'm going to follow the ways and all that. Starts to just discover a little bit more about himself. And there we come across what's the name of the character, like the species that it is. It's a I can't remember the species.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of like fairies.
Ooh.
Um, they're like they kind of are in line with like Lathander.
Okay.
Anyway, um, it was an NPC, so a character that our DM was playing. and Jay and he like start to form this relationship basically, and they fall in love. They end up falling in love, and they actually like at the very end of the campaign, get married and whatever, have a happy life. Um, so there was this like kind of like this really big emotional impact for me because growing up um uh heterosexual male, right, and very strict Mormon, it never really had like this opportunity to see a whole lot of the gay community, right? And I know we haven't mentioned it here yet, but
Hmm.
Logan, our DM, he's gay, and he's the one that kind of brought me into this whole group. So there was like this kind of like tension in me that was like, am I allowed to like play this character? Am I allowed to like really get into this? Um, and also like, what is everyone else gonna like think about me? If like I come across and I, announce that my character is gay or bisexual or whatever. Um, and that was like a very, I don't know what emotion to call it, but that was like something like very hard and challenging to overcome because this was like a strict no in Mormonism, right? Like
Hmm.
you can't ever like think about that or you know act on those feelings. And not that I have those feelings at all, but just to even play that character, I was like, I'm pretending to have this character who's gay, who's attracted to the same sex, it still felt a little like forbidden. And so for me, I think it was really like the ultimate way for me to like kind of process that and deconstruct that, if you will, because there's been a lot of that, obviously.
Hmm.
And so to actually play through that character and like role play some of those scenes with the gay DM, it was like this is real life, but it's also happening in here, so it's very, very interesting. And I don't know if my other players or teammates, or I don't even know what you call them, the other people that play, if they even know like what was going on inside of me. But like that was like really hard for me to play and play out and really dive into this character as deep as I did. So let's say that was like probably the biggest emotional impact that I've ever had as a character, to like really process and deconstruct this very real issue, or kind of controversial thing that had happened in my brain and my heart. um so yeah, I would say that was probably like the biggest event there.
Yeah, yeah. I love that through that character, not only were you able to neutralize gayness, like even just that, but to have a positive connotation with that as well, I think is really impressive. Especially because, like you said, it's not that that's you, but just that something that it's like, well, why not? You're role playing a character. You get to put aspects of yourself that you're not there. And for anybody, well, definitely people who are LDS, but I would say even people who have also left the LDS Church, that would be frightening, I think, to most people. Which that's so strange. What, frightening? Like frightening to play, like, I don't know, this made up character that has this particular aspect of their identity is kind of wild. But I think that's really cool. That, I mean, you still made a conscious decision to say, no, I am going to have this be a part of my character, and it might be uncomfortable at first, but also like this feels worth it to me, and I think like I want this to be a part of this character storyline. I
Yeah.
think that's really cool to have that be a place where you got to deconstruct some of those feelings. um yeah, because I think that can be a big one for people to tackle, honestly, when they're
Yeah.
leaving their religion, if that religion does have negative feelings towards the LGBTQ community. Like, how do you start to break that down? um yeah, so that's really cool. Also, I love that you played a paladin and that they worship Lathander. So, Noct Prone is a trilogy series. That's what we have available on the internet right now. We have 3 different campaigns. Campaign 2, which I feel like at this point we usually refer to as our most popular campaign, had my favorite character in it. My biggest character as far as deconstruction goes, and I don't think I've ever mentioned this explicitly. that I've also left the LDS Church. I literally don't know if I've said that in reference to anything in the Nocturne side of the internet. I won't get into that because I want to hear about your story today and not mine. But I'm already just comparing notes for my character Celine and her kind of religious experience worshiping Lathander. Like she wasn't a
Nice.
paladin, but like huge Lathander worshiper. And just I can already see some of those similarities, but also some distinct differences. While we were both probably accomplishing something similar there as far as just deconstruction and exploring parts of like that aspect of ourselves and just similarities and differences. So I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Okay, so different question, could relate to this character, but also just in general in the last 8 years of playing D&D, do you find it challenging to play paladins, clerics, characters that tend to like worship a god? Part of the reason why I ask this is because Cade, my husband, when he plays clerics and paladins, his least favorite thing is trying to choose a god to worship, because it's just an aspect of his life that he's like, I don't want to think about this. I don't want to deal with this. I'm not a god guy. Like that's his perspective. So I don't know. Like, do you find that challenging?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, yeah, this was my first time playing a paladin, which I guess they're kind of a mix between a support character and like frontline character. Um, if I'm like in the character building phase, I am definitely steering away from those types of characters in general. I think, yeah, there is probably something deep down that's just like you have to choose a god. You have to choose
Mm-hmm.
this like way of thinking and belief that maybe is like a turn off for me. Um, I would definitely say there's a struggle there. Even playing Jay, this character who was um worshiping Lathander, having to like play out some of the scenarios where like I was praying to Lathander or
Right.
whatever it might be. If anything, these characters, if they choose to support a god that I am like playing, I'm usually tying in some sort of like opposite god or goddess. So like Shar, the goddess of deception and I think darkness or whatever, was
Mm-hmm.
definitely a huge player in this campaign with Jay, because it's like the opposite, right? And there might have been some moments where Jay has some engagement with Shar and kind of falls to the dark side a little bit, and so it is a struggle, but I think there's ways to kind of like work around that and be like, let's make this like kind of the opposite of my experience, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's actually interesting that you say that, because in having conversations with people who kind of feel that way, they tend to lead away from those characters. I think like that's definitely one way to do it, is to pick a god that doesn't feel too close to home as far as like the god that
Yeah.
you had previously worshipped, right?
Right.
But then
Right.
also I've heard of people who, even clerics that like their power is from their ancestors or from nature, and they
Mm,
basically treat it like a god without actually being a godlike entity. It's just
yeah.
interesting how people sometimes tend to create those workarounds when that just feels like, I mean, speaking of putting aspects of yourself into your character, but that just might not be one you want to do. If
Right.
that does kind of hit
Right.
close to home and you're like, I don't really want that, then, there's ways to get around that.
Yeah. 100%.
Okay, very cool. Um, okay, so the other thing that I think is significant about D&D, in general, but I think especially for someone who's experienced a faith crisis and who's left behind a whole community of people, knowing that you've played a game for 8 years with a really similar table of people, I just want to know how that's had an effect on the relationships that you've had with the people at that table.
Yeah. So, Logan kind of being the original person to bring me into the group, um, 10 years ago, I would have never been able to say like one of my best friends is gay, like I
Mm-hmm.
never would have been able to like even explore that relationship because of the perceived experience from other people, like, oh, like, is he gay too? And I would like worry about that or whatever. But to have someone like Logan, who's like so deep into the world of like fantasy, like you can talk to him about anything D&D related and he will have an answer. I'm pretty sure this guy studies the books um like in his spare time. Uh and let's see, Kimball, my younger brother. This is a really interesting one. Kimball and I are like 6 years apart. And so just out of this range of like while I was like on my mission, he's like finishing high school and kind of like coming in to this his adulthood. And then when I get out of my mission, I get married and like leave home. So Kimmel and
Mm-hmm.
I, while we had like a little bit of a childhood together, didn't get a chance to like really like strengthen that bond. And I'm the oldest boy, so I don't have any older brothers. And for me, I was like, I really want to be that older brother that I wanted for some of my siblings. And when Kimball joined the group, I was like, oh man, this is like really my chance to strengthen this bond. Um, and Kimball's a very quiet, a little bit more reserved person in general. But I will say it's been like one of the most, it's been like, yeah, one of the most like rewarding experiences to watch him develop as a person, but also like open up and be vulnerable and like do all these different characters and get into character and like start doing accents and voices because like he does have that same talent that I do. And so lately it's been, especially lately, it's been like really, really fun to get into it with my brother and whatever character he's playing. And we've really been able to like strengthen that bond that we didn't actually have a whole lot of, I would say, like when we were younger, just due to age gap, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, Adam, um, he has been my best friend since second grade, and he was also active in the church. So it's been very interesting to kind of see that journey as well. And for context, like he no longer attends, um, but he did when we first started. For sure, he was still a part of it. So playing certain characters, playing certain scenarios when he was there, it was like almost like I didn't feel like I could like fully reach these certain levels because I didn't want to be like inappropriate. I didn't want to offend him. Jay was not a character I would have ever played in front of Adam, obviously, because like that would have been so obvious to him.
Mm-hmm.
So Jay was only a character I played after I knew that like Adam was not going anymore. Um, but even so, like Adam was one of those friends that during that time of me leaving the church, there was a little bit of separation, right? I lost a lot of friends. I lost a lot of connection with people simply because they knew I was done with the church, right? And that happens everywhere, all the time, all around. Um, so after some time of leaving the church, a couple of years, obviously, uh, starting to dive back in with this relationship with Adam, inviting him to D&D, and then all of a sudden, seeing this thing happen to him in his life about his experience with the church, I was like, holy moly, like I can't believe that I'm here for this, like for you, because I didn't really have anybody. Um so that was like a really cool, unique experience that I don't think would have ever happened if we weren't playing D&D
Yeah. Yeah.
regularly. Um and then our most recent player, my brother-in-law Matt, um he is older, and so I do now look to him as like kind of that older brother that I never had. And um it's interesting because 9 years ago when my wife and I were going through this really tough, tumultuous time, he was of that same mentality, right? Of like, you shouldn't be with this guy, you shouldn't be married to this guy because of this and this and this. And so there was a time where like I think Matt probably hated me and didn't consider me family. And fast forward to now, like we're super close. We talk all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We hang out all the time. Obviously, he has also had his journey out of the church, and I guess should mention like my younger brother as well, has had that same journey. So like, there's this group of guys that like one of us, Logan, has never been a part of the church. The four of us have, and we've all left. And it just creates this like crazy dynamic where we're literally allowed to explore anything. We're allowed to talk about anything. All subjects are on the table. Um, and I would say that we've all grown this like close bond that, our check-ins before we start playing are like, hey, how you doing? We're actually checking in with each other, and
Yeah.
we're caring about each other in real life, and then, start to play. And for me, there's just like this unbreakable bond now between all these guys. Um, that I would like, obviously I'd be destroyed if we couldn't play. It would affect me in such a way that would be tough. But I've formed individual bonds with all these people, and yeah, that's something that you can't replace. That's something that you can't like replicate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's cool to kind of break down a couple of the things that make that significant, because it's not just, I don't know. I mean, it'd be hard to not have bonds with people that you play with over the course of 8 years, but it's the fact that, you have that dedicated space to spend time together, and it has been consistent over time. Having a space that is expressive and vulnerable, even if you did get together consistently with all of those people, like the activity might not really allow for those kinds of things to be able to create that deeper bond, and just to have a game that does offer some connection, right? And so it's just cool to think of what you've maybe accomplished with those relationships, that it's questionable on how else you would have been able to get there with all of those people, right, over the last couple of years. So it's really cool, and I'm glad that you've been able to also have something to gain from that aspect of your D&D experience.
Yeah.
Um, okay, I think I have one more question. Um,
Sure.
at this point in time, since you're kind of in a healthier place with your faith journey, what do you feel like is the most fulfilling part of D&D for you at this point in time?
Yeah, I kind of just touched on it, I guess, a little bit.
For sure.
It's this freedom. Um, it's the freedom to choose, to believe, to think, whatever. Anything is possible. Everything is up in the air. Um, and all avenues are available, essentially. Um, like I don't think that I would have ever considered playing half the characters that I do, and playing out some of the scenarios that I do if I was still kind of this believing church member, because I would be like, well, this is so against, what we were taught, or what we know to be true. Um, so yeah, I would say it's got to be the freedom of just choosing, right? Of thinking a certain thing, and then even outside of the game, it's like all these different circumstances can be possible, while I'm like thinking about things that can happen to my character, and
Mm-hmm.
writing out things that are possible. So yeah, very very base level, that would be the freedom to choose for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it does seem like that's been a pattern throughout your DTRPG experience, is that aspect of being able to choose. I love what you said, like all avenues are open. Like that is really cool. And it's interesting. I definitely don't want to speak for anybody who's religious, and even people who are LDS, so they may feel that all those avenues are open for them as well. But I do think that that's a common experience, that people do feel limited in what they feel like is okay to bring into the game, and that could mean so many different things. And so to really feel that freedom to utilize those games how you want, to role play what you want, really is cool. It is cool. and
Yeah.
and again, the replayability there, just the fact that
Hmm.
there's so many things that you can explore and have left to explore, things you've already done in the past 8 years, and also things that you could do,
Yeah.
that's amazing. It's awesome.
100%.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for being on the show, for sharing your story. Uh, Genuinely, I just feel like it's so valuable. And I feel like there will be people who maybe are just interested, even if they don't relate directly, but also people who relate directly with a lot of the things that you had to share. So I really do appreciate you for that. So,
Yeah.
as far as shout outs go, I have a couple of things. So you mentioned that you do have an Instagram. You're not a content creator, but if people have a want to connect with you, we'll
Yeah.
have that in the show notes. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. And then you also have two other things. So you have a brother, one that's in the group,
Yeah. So Kimball.
Kimball. Okay, so
Kimball. Yeah.
Kimball, yeah, you go ahead. You can introduce it.
Okay. Yeah. So Kimball, he's a videographer. So creates content, a lot of music videos and creative things like that. His company name is Helios Visuals. So they've got a YouTube page and just creates really, really cool stuff and gets to share it with us every so often. So that's really been cool to see.
Cool. So we'll have his Instagram and his YouTube in the show notes so that people can check that out, which would be really fun. And then you also have your brother-in-law has a new drink company. So tell us about that.
Yeah, we actually had a chance to try it for the first time last week. We're like one of the
Fun.
first 20 people or so to try it.
Wow.
But it's a Brazilian seltzer, caipirinha, which is the popular cocktail down there. They've made a seltzer out of it, and so it is so delicious. It's made with real fruit juice. So think like, High Noon and Trulies and White Claws and all that. It's gonna put these all to shame, honestly. So Lua is the name, and it should be. I think they're having a big release party on it in July, but it should be kind of rolling forth through the U.S. Throughout this year. So.
Cool. Awesome. So we will have a link to that as well. Obviously that is a 21 and up drink. I don't know what all the rules are on, this isn't a paid advertisement, so that might help a lot. We're just talking about it. Anyways, but yeah, so I'll have to look into that, but it's great. I'm glad. And I will have all the details for that in the show notes. So, okay. I think that's all we have. Is there anything else you want to shout out?
I think that's it. No, thank you so much for having me. This was honestly a pleasure, and it was crazy how the universe kind of brought it all together.
Yes, exactly. I hope to have more guests that just the stars align and, I just end up getting to make connections with really cool people. So I think that's just awesome that we had the opportunity to do it in the first place. So yeah, thanks again. I keep forgetting to do this at the end of our show, but if you have not subscribed, please subscribe. Our YouTube is still but a baby, and we're still figuring out that particular platform because we're still generally new to YouTube. So subscribe. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, be sure to review it as well. Give us as many stars as you feel like is fitting for us. We are not on our Knocked Prone Trilogy series feed anymore, so if you've given us a review in the past, it will not be on this feed, and we would appreciate some there too. It definitely helps us be able to see more people and give them an opportunity to become audience members. And then we also have a Patreon as well. So if you want to check out our Patreon, we've got that. So yeah, plenty of ways to support us and help us reach new audiences. So I need to be better about remembering to shout that out. So I appreciate you all. Thank you. All right. Well, remember, when life knocks you flat on your back, all you got to do is keep rolling, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.